The rain felt like needles on my skin, or maybe that was just the weight of 1,000 staring eyes. My name is Alara, and today I was unmade. My knees hit the muddy earth of the ceremonial clearing, the cold seeping through my thin linen pants. I didn't feel it, I only felt the scorching brand of their collective gaze. The entire Silvermane pack was here, a sea of faces under the weeping gray sky, their expressions ranging from pity to outright contempt. And at the front on the stone dais stood my family. My father, Alpha Arcturus, his face a mask of stony disappointment. My mother, Luna Selene, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears she would not let fall for me. And my brother Kieran, the golden heir, whose jaw was tight with something that might have been shame or just irritation at the delay. Alpha Arcturus's voice, amplified by the power of his rank, rolled over the assembly, devoid of all warmth. It was a sound I had once found comforting, now it flayed me alive. Alara of the Silvermane, he intoned, the ritual words turning to ice. You have reached your 20th year, the moon has risen over you 13 times since your first shift. And yet no secondary gender has manifested. No alpha's strength, no beta's balance, no omega's grace. The pack spirit is silent for you. A low murmur ran through the crowd. I kept my eyes on the mud, on a single blade of grass bent under the weight of a raindrop. Focus on that, I begged myself. Don't cry, don't you dare cry in front of them. The law of our ancestors is clear, my father continued, and the pain in my chest sharpened. He wasn't my father in this moment. He was the Alpha pronouncing judgment. A white wolf without a designation is a ghost within the pack. A limb that cannot feel the pack bond is a limb that must be released. My breath hitched, a small, pathetic sound swallowed by the rain. Released, such a gentle word for exile, for being cut off from the only home, the only heartbeat I had ever known. Therefore, Alpha Arcturus declared, his final words striking with the force of a physical blow, you are henceforth Omega-stained, you carry the burden of absence. You may dwell within the territorial bounds, but you are outside the pack bond. You will not join in hunts, in councils, in ceremonies. Your voice holds no weight, you are a shadow. This is the will of the pack and the moon. The formal rejection slammed into me, a silent, psychic wave. One moment there was the low hum of the pack link in the back of my mind, a comforting sense of presence, of belonging like distant music. The next, silence. A void so profound, so deafening that I physically swayed. It was the loneliest sound in the world. The absence of a sound that had been my birthright, I was untethered, adrift. Let the ceremony conclude, my brother Kieran's voice rang out, brisk and efficient. He was already moving on. The pack began to disperse, their whispers now unchecked. Always was a weak thing. A flaw in the Alpha's line. What use is a wolf that cannot connect? I forced myself to stand. My legs trembled, but I locked my knees. I would not crawl away. I lifted my head, meeting my mother's eyes for one fleeting second. The sorrow in them was deep, but it was anchored by duty. She gave the slightest shake of her head, a warning, do not make a scene. Then she turned and followed my father and brother into the great lodge, away from the cold and away from me. The clearing emptied, leaving me alone with the drumming rain, the Omega-stained. It was a cruel title. Omegas were rare, cherished, the emotional heart of a pack, blessed with a powerful, soothing bond. I was the opposite, a null point. A stain of emptiness where a gift should have been. I didn't return to the family quarters. My belongings, a meager sack of clothes and a few personal items, had already been moved to the outskirts. The Staines' cottage, they called it. A dilapidated hut near the forbidden western ridge where the forest grew dense and silent. It was a place for broken things. The walk was a blur of gray-green and cold. The cottage was as grim as promised, mossy stone, a sagging roof, a single room smelling of damp earth and neglect. I dropped my sack inside the door and kept walking. I couldn't breathe in there. The silence of the broken bond was a pressure in my skull, and I needed to outrun it. I ran into the woods not as a wolf, my shift was as clumsy and powerless as the rest of me, but on two human legs, stumbling over roots, letting the brambles tear at my clothes. The rain mingled with the hot, silent tears finally streaking down my face. I ran until my lungs burned and the light began to fade, not caring where I was. That's when I heard it. A sound that cut through the dripping forest silence and the howling void inside me. It wasn't a growl. It was a rumble, deep and resonant, vibrating up from the earth itself. A sound of pure, untamed fury and agony. I froze, my breath pluming in the chilly air. I knew where I was, the foot of the western ridge, and I knew what lay in the caverns above. Skal, the giant white wolf, a creature of legend older than the packs, a force of nature given fur and fang. For generations, alphas had tried to bind him to prove their worth by riding the beast into battle. For generations, they had failed. The mightiest of our kind had been thrown, mauled, or simply ignored by the colossal creature. He was a living trial, a monument to failure, kept on the sacred grounds, a challenge that taunted every alpha born. The rumble came again, followed by a sharp, pained whine that belied the beast's size. It was a sound that spoke of a suffering so deep it transcended species. Without thinking, driven by a compulsion I didn't understand, I began to climb. The path was treacherous, slick with wet stone, but I scrambled up, drawn by that terrible, lonely sound. I reached a ledge that opened into a vast, shadowy cavern, and there he was. Skal was massive, far larger than any telling had described. He was the size of a small cottage, his fur a tumultuous mix of storm cloud gray and charcoal black, with eyes like chips of molten gold now dim with pain. He was lying on his side, his great ribcage heaving, and I saw the source of his anguish. A huge, jagged shard of dark metal, like a corrupted thorn, was embedded deep in his shoulder. The flesh around it was swollen and pulsed with a sickly, violet light. It was no natural injury. It reeked of dark magic, of poison. He saw me. His massive head lifted, and a warning growl erupted from his throat, shaking pebbles from the cavern's ceiling. It was a sound meant to send me fleeing in terror, but I didn't flee. The void where my pack bond had been echoed his isolated fury. His pain mirrored the raw, gaping wound in my own spirit. We were both alone, both rejected, both in agony. I took a step forward, my heart hammering against my ribs. "It's all right," I whispered, my voice trembling, not with the fear I should have felt, but with a strange, aching empathy. "I'm not going to hurt you." The giant white wolf stared, his golden eyes narrowing. He snorted a dismissive huff of air. I was nothing. A scentless, powerless human girl. I took another step, then another, moving slowly, my hands open at my sides. "I can see it's hurting you," I said, my voice growing steadier, softened by a compassion I hadn't known I still possessed. "That thorn, it doesn't belong there." I was within reach now. One swipe of his paw could end me. His gaze tracked me, intelligent and wary. I sank to my knees in the damp earth of the cavern floor, not in submission, but to make myself smaller, less threatening. "May I?" I breathed, my hand hovering in the air, pointing toward the shard. He watched me for a long, endless moment. The forest held its breath. Then, with a sigh that seemed to come from the very roots of the mountain, the great wolf laid his head back down on the stone, closing his eyes. It wasn't permission, it was exhaustion, a surrender to his fate, but I chose to take it as a chance. Gently, so gently, I placed my hands on his fur near the wound. It was coarse and warm, thrumming with a latent power that made my fingertips tingle. The vile energy from the shard bit at my skin, a cold burn. I ignored it. I focused on the heat of his body, the rhythm of his labored breath. "This will hurt," I warned him, my voice a thread of sound. I wrapped my hands around the base of the dark shard. The moment I touched it, a jolt of blinding, icy pain shot up my arms. I cried out, but I didn't let go. I pulled, Skal roared. The sound was earth-shattering, a blast of pure torment that echoed through the ridge. He jerked and I was thrown back, the corrupted thorn clutched in my hands, now dripping with both his blood and that strange violet light. I scrambled away as he lurched to his feet, towering over me, his lips pulled back from teeth longer than my hand. I crouched, holding the poisonous shard away from me, waiting for the killing blow. I had dared to touch him, to cause him more pain. This was how I would die, but the blow didn't come. Skal stood, panting, staring down at me. The furious glare in his eyes, it was changing. The sickly violet light was receding from the wound, which now bled clean, crimson blood. The tension bled from his massive frame. He took a deep, shuddering breath, his first clean breath in who knew how long. He lowered his head, bringing his enormous muzzle close to me. I could feel his hot breath on my skin. I closed my eyes. A warm, rough sensation brushed across my cheek. He was nuzzling me, very carefully, with a gentleness unimaginable for such a beast. My eyes flew open. The molten gold of his eyes was clear now, fixed on me with an unnerving, profound intensity. He looked from my face to the dark shard I still clutched, then back to my face. In that look, I saw not a monster, but a creature of immense and lonely power. And in that moment, the howling void inside me didn't fill, but it echoed with a new foreign sound, not the pack bond, something else, something wilder and older. He nudged my shoulder with his nose, a clear push. Then he turned and paced back into the depths of his cavern, casting one last, inscrutable glance my way before disappearing into the shadows. I sat there in the gathering dark, the rain-cooled air sharp in my lungs, the poisonous thorn cold in my hand. The mark of my rejection still felt fresh on my skin, but as I looked toward the dark cavern where the impossible wolf had vanished, a single, defiant thought ignited in the silence. They called me a ghost, a stain, but a ghost couldn't touch a legend. And a stain couldn't pull a thorn from the heart of a storm. I stumbled back to the Stain's cottage in a daze, the dark shard wrapped in a strip torn from my tunic. My hand still tingled, a strange, cold fire lingering where I had gripped the corrupted metal. The void where my pack bond had been was still there, a silent, aching hollow in my mind. But now there was a whisper in that void, not a sound, a sensation, a low, resonant thrum like feeling the deep note of a bell through stone. It was the echo of Skal's presence, a warmth against the cold emptiness. It didn't speak, it didn't connect like the pack link, it simply was, a mountain on the horizon, a storm sleeping in the hills. And somehow I knew it was aware of me, a tiny, flickering light at the edge of its vast perception. The cottage was dark and colder than the forest. I lit the single, guttering oil lamp with trembling fingers. In its weak light, I unwrapped the shard. It was about the length of my forearm, jagged and wicked, its surface seeming to drink the lamplight rather than reflect it. That sickly violet glow had faded to a dull, intermittent pulse like a dying ember, but the malevolence it radiated was palpable. This was no natural object. It was a weapon deliberately forged and aimed. Who would do this? Who could do this to a creature like Skal? The questions swirled, frightening in their implications. This was beyond pack rivalries. This smelled of the old, forbidden magics, the kind spoken of in warnings by elder wolves. A soft knock at the door nearly made me jump out of my skin. I hastily covered the shard again, shoving it under the thin pallet that served as a bed. "Who is it?" My voice came out rough, scratchy. "It's me, Lyra." A wave of fragile relief washed over me. Lyra was a beta, a weaver's daughter, not a close friend. I had none of those, but one of the few who had never openly mocked my weakness. She'd sometimes shared her lunch with me when I was training alone. I opened the door. She stood there, a hood pulled over her auburn hair, a basket in her hands. Her kind, oval face was pinched with worry. She slipped in quickly, closing the door behind her. "Ilara," she breathed, her eyes scanning my torn, muddy clothes, the scratches on my arms. "By the moon, are you all right?" I heard a terrible roar from the western ridge. The whole pack felt a tremor of fear through the bond. Some of the hunters thought it was an earthquake. She paused, her gaze searching mine. You weren't up there, were you?" The concern in her voice was a balm and a torment. She could still feel the pack bond. She belonged. I was a ghost to it now. "I went for a walk," I said, the half-truth bitter on my tongue. My voice was low, guarded. The woods are the only place left for me. Lyra's expression softened with pity. I stiffened. Pity was a cage with velvet bars. "I brought you some things," she said, setting the basket on the rickety table. "Bread, cheese, a wedge of dried meat, a few apples, and this." She pulled out a thick woolen blanket. "It gets cold out here." Thank you, I murmured, genuine gratitude warring with shame. I was now an object of charity. Ilara, she hesitated, twisting her fingers. Kieran the Alfair, he's announced a trial for Skull. Ice water trickled down my spine. A trial, what do you mean? In 3 days' time, he says the pack needs a symbol of strength now more than ever, that his father's reign is cautious. He believes it is his destiny to succeed where all others have failed, to ride the giant wolf and prove the Silvermane's might for the next generation. Lyra's words tumbled out, laced with a nervous energy. The whole pack is buzzing with it. He's been training relentlessly. A cold, hard knot formed in my stomach. Kieran, with his unwavering confidence and alpha strength, approaching Skull, the image of my brother, proud, powerful, but utterly unaware of the poison, of the pain, of the creature's profound intelligence, filled me with a dread that was entirely new. It wasn't just fear for him, it was fear of him, of what he might provoke. He can't, I whispered, more to myself than to her. Lyra misread my terror. He's the strongest of his generation, Ilara, maybe he can. She reached out, touching my arm. The pack bond allowed her to offer a tiny pulse of comfort. I felt nothing but the pressure of her fingers. She flinched, remembering my isolation. I'm sorry, I should go, they'll notice I'm missing. She left as quietly as she came, leaving the food and the blanket and a world of trouble behind. I couldn't eat. I sat on the floor, my back against the cold stone wall, listening to the whisper in my void, the thrumming, mountain-like presence. He doesn't know, I thought, pouring my anxiety toward that presence. He'll see you as a beast, a challenge. He won't understand. There was no response, just the steady, resonant thrum, but the quality of it shifted minutely. A slight edge like distant thunder on a clear day. A note of anticipation, or warning. The next 2 days were a strange limbo. I avoided the main pack grounds, skulking around the edges like the shadow I was proclaimed to be. I foraged for herbs, my hands still oddly sensitive, seeming to find the healing plants by instinct. I cleaned the cottage, the mindless work unable to drown out the growing tension, and I felt the pack preparing. The energy was palpable even to an outsider, a fervent, excited buzz, drums practiced for ceremony, the clang of blacksmiths checking armor. Kieran was everywhere, a golden center of attention, radiating certainty. On the morning of the 3rd day, the day of the trial, I awoke before dawn, my heart already racing. The whisper in my void was no longer a thrum. It was a low, steady growl, vibrating in the very marrow of my bones. Skull was not sleeping, he was waiting. I couldn't stay in the cottage. A compulsion, fiercer than any I'd ever known, pulled me toward the ridge. I had to be there, I had to see. I took a hidden, game trail path up the ridge, one that emerged onto a high, secluded outcrop shrouded in gorse and hawthorn. It gave me a clear, if distant, view of the cavern entrance and the broad, rocky platform before it. Below, in the clearing at the ridge's base, the entire Silvermane pack had gathered. Colors, banners, expectant faces turned upward. My father and mother sat on a raised dais, regal and impassive. My brother stood before them, clad not in finery but in practical, reinforced leathers. He looked every inch the heroic alpha to be. The ceremony began with horns and chanting. I couldn't hear the words, but I knew the rituals, the calling of ancestral strength, the proclamation of intent. Kieran raised his arms, his voice, strong and clear, carrying up the mountainside. He then turned and began the climb, not the treacherous path I had taken, but the formal, time-worn stairs cut into the stone. My breath caught in my throat, the growl in my mind deepened. I could feel a pressure building in the air, a static charge before a lightning strike. Kieran reached the platform. He stood tall, his aura of alpha command radiating outwards, a force meant to dominate and compel. I could feel its echo, a blunt, demanding pressure even from my hiding spot. "Skull," he shouted, his voice ringing with authority. "Ancient One, Beast of the Mountain, I am Kieran, son of Arcturus, Alpha heir of the Silvermane. I come to claim the pact forgotten. I come to ride you into legend." Silence. Then, from the deep black of the cavern, 2 points of molten gold ignited. They emerged, followed by the colossal, storm-furred head, the powerful shoulders. Skull stepped out into the gray morning light, dwarfing my brother. The pack below gasped as one, a sound of awe and terror. Kieran, to his credit, did not falter. He took a step forward, his will pressing against the creature. "Kneel," he commanded, the alpha power saturating the word. Skull's lips pulled back. The growl that emerged wasn't just in my mind now. It was a physical wave of sound that shook dust from the rocks. It was a refusal that shook the very foundations of Kieran's certainty. Kieran's face hardened. He tried again, his power flaring brighter. "I am your destined rider." "Kneel." Skull took a step forward, then another. He didn't kneel. He stalked toward Kieran, his head low, his gaze locked on the young alpha heir. It wasn't submission, it was assessment, and it was found wanting. Panic flickered in Kieran's eyes, quickly masked by fury. This was not going as the stories said. The beast was not ignoring him, nor was it attacking in mindless rage. It was judging him and finding him lacking. "You will obey," Kieran roared, and in a flash of light and coalescing power, he shifted. Where a man had stood was now a magnificent, silver-furred wolf, large and powerful, muscles coiled. He bared his teeth, a challenge in every line of his body, a mistake, a terrible, prideful mistake. Skull's response was instantaneous. A roar not of pain as I had heard, but of pure, unadulterated wrath. It was the sound of a mountain deciding to move. He didn't pounce, he simply charged, a tidal wave of fur and fury. Kieran, for all his strength, was a leaf in a hurricane. He was batted aside with a swipe of a paw that looked almost casual. He yelped, tumbling across the stone, scrambling to find purchase. He tried to rally, to dart in an attack, but Skull was a force of nature. Another blow sent him crashing into the rock face with a sickening thud. He shifted back to human form, bruised, bleeding from a gash on his forehead, his clothes torn, his pride in tatters. The pack below was dead silent, horror-struck. Skull loomed over my brother's prone form, his muzzle dipping down. Kieran froze, staring death in its golden eyes, and in that moment the whisper in my void became a scream. Not of anger, but of a desperate, protective urge that blazed through me, hotter than any pack bond. I didn't think, I acted. I broke from my hiding spot, scrambling down the rough slope toward the platform, stones skittering under my feet. "No," the cry was ripped from my throat, raw and primal. Every eye the pack below, Kieran's on the ground, and the giant, molten gold ones above snapped to me. The stained Omega, the ghost, charging onto the sacred trial ground. "Skull, stop," I shouted, throwing myself between the giant wolf and my brother, my arms spread wide. I faced the creature, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Please, don't." The world held its breath. Skull's gaze shifted from Kieran to me. The wrath in his eyes, it didn't vanish, but it banked, tempered by something akin to curiosity. He sniffed the air, his massive head tilting. I slowly lowered my arms, my entire body trembling. I took a step toward him, my voice dropping to a murmur meant only for him. He didn't know, he doesn't understand, like I didn't understand until I saw the thorn. I heard Kieran stir behind me, a groan of pain and shock. "Ilara, what are you? Get away from it." I ignored him. I kept my eyes on Skull. The giant wolf stared at me for a long, endless moment. Then he snorted, a hot breath that stirred my hair. He took one last look at the cowed alpha heir, a look of profound disdain, then turned. With a final, earth-shaking rumble that was pure dismissal, he paced back into the darkness of his cavern, leaving me standing alone on the platform, shielding the air of the Silvermane pack. The silence from below was shattered by a rising wave of stunned murmurs. I turned slowly to face my brother. His expression was a maelstrom of pain, humiliation, and a dawning, terrible realization. He wasn't looking at the beast, he was looking at me. At the sister without a scent, without a bond, who had just commanded the unconquerable. And in his eyes I didn't see gratitude, I saw the first cold spark of fear. The descent from the ridge was a silent, agonizing procession. Kieran refused my help, limping on his own, his face a rigid mask of stoic pain. 2 senior betas rushed up the formal stairs to assist him, shooting me looks of utter bewilderment. I followed behind, a ghost once more, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes like physical blows. The pack parted before us, a sea of whispers. She stood before Skull, the beast listened to her, The stained Omega commanded the giant, commanded. That was the word they used. It wasn't true. I had begged, I had pleaded from a place of shared understanding. But to them, it looked like dominion, and in a world built on dominance, that was the only lens they had. We were led not to the healing halls, but directly to the Alpha's lodge. My father's summons was a given. The great hall was empty of all but family and the highest-ranking elders. The air was thick with tension and the scent of my brother's blood. Alpha Arcturus sat on his carved throne, Luna Selene beside him, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. Kieran was eased into a chair, a healer already hovering, tending to the gash on his brow and his likely cracked ribs. I stood in the center of the room, exposed, still in my dirty, torn clothes from my scramble down the ridge. Explain. My father's voice was a low, dangerous rumble, all paternal pretense stripped away. Kieran spoke first, his voice tight with pain and fury. The beast was enraged, unpredictable. It rejected the challenge, it attacked with malice. He shot a glance at me, his eyes hard. Then she intervened. Shouted at it, threw herself in the way. I don't know what trick she used, but it turned and left. All eyes turned to me. The elder council, stern-faced men and women who had voted for my staining, watched with icy scrutiny. "Ilara," my mother said, her voice strained. "What possessed you? You could have been killed." I took a shallow breath. My voice felt small in the vast hall. I wasn't possessed, I couldn't watch him die. "You interfered in a sacred alpha trial, Elder Torvin, a wolf with a face like weathered granite, intoned. An unpardonable transgression. The stained has no place on the sacred ground, let alone to disrupt pack destiny." "Her actions saved your heir's life," my mother countered, a flicker of her steel showing. "Did they?" Alpha Arcturus's gaze was fixed on me, probing, analytical. "Or did they undermine it?" Kieran's trial was one of dominance. Either he would dominate the beast or be dominated by it. That is the way, to be spared by an Omega stained, no less. He let the sentence hang, its implication more damaging than any physical wound. Kieran flinched, the shame burning brighter than his injuries. "How did you know the beast would not kill you?" Another elder, Nara, asked, her sharp eyes missing nothing. This was the precipice. I could lie. I could say I was mad with grief, that I acted without thought. But the memory of the dark shard under my palate, of Skull's intelligent, pained eyes pressed on me. "They saw a monster. I had seen a wounded sovereign. I've been to the ridge before," I admitted, my voice gaining a sliver of strength. "After the staining, I heard it in pain. I found Skull wounded. There was a piece of dark metal, like a poisoned thorn, lodged in his shoulder. I removed it." A stunned silence blanketed the hall. "You touched the sacred beast," Elder Torvin breathed, aghast. "You removed a weapon from its flesh." My father leaned forward, his alpha aura pressing down on me, demanding truth. "Describe this thorn." I did, the jagged metal, the unnatural violet light, the cold malevolence. As I spoke, the elders exchanged grim looks. My father's face grew darker. "Dark iron," he finally said, the word falling like a tombstone. "Forged in the old, blighted forges, used by sorcerers and betrayers. It hasn't been seen in these lands for a century." His eyes narrowed at me. "And you simply pulled it out without consequence." "My hands still feel cold," I said, holding them out. They looked normal, but the eerie chill in my bones was real. But he was in agony. It was poisoning him. I couldn't leave it. "And after you removed this dark iron shard," my mother asked slowly, "what happened?" I met her gaze. "He let me go. He nudged me as if in thanks." I omitted the nuzzle, the profound connection. That was for the whisper in my void alone. "Impossible," Kieran spat, wincing as the healer tightened a bandage. "The beast knows only rage. It doesn't reason. It doesn't feel gratitude." "Then how do you explain its retreat today, Alphair?" Elder Nara asked, not unkindly, but with pointed logic. "If it knows only rage, why did it not slaughter the Omega who stood before it? Why did it obey her command to desist?" "It wasn't obedience," I screamed internally, but I held my tongue. "This changes things," Alpha Arcturus murmured, more to himself than to the room. He stood pacing before his throne, a weapon of dark magic used against a creature of primal power on our very borders, an attack we did not detect. He stopped, his gaze landing on me again, but now it was the gaze of a strategist, not a disappointed father. And you, Ilara, a null, a void in the pack bond, yet you can approach Skull, you can touch him, he tolerates your presence, perhaps even acknowledges it. The way he said it made my skin crawl. I was no longer just a stain, I was a curiosity. A potential tool. What are you suggesting, Arcturus? Luna Selene asked, her voice tight. I am suggesting that the moon's rejection may have other purposes, he said carefully. A wolf the pack bond cannot touch. A wolf, a creature of ancient magic, does not perceive as a threat, or perhaps perceives as something else entirely. You cannot be thinking of using her, my mother said, a thread of horror in her voice. The safety of the pack is paramount, Elder Torvin stated. If the Stained One has a unique rapport with the beast, it must be explored. This dark iron is a declaration of a hidden enemy. Skull is a power on our land. We must understand this connection. I felt the walls of a new, more gilded cage closing in around me, from rejected outcast to peculiar asset in the blink of an eye. No, Kieran said, pushing himself up in his chair, his face pale but determined. It is my burden, my failure. I will recover. I will train harder. I will face Skull again and fulfill my destiny. We do not need to resort to this. He couldn't even look at me. Your bravery is noted, my son, Alpha Arcturus said, but his tone was final. But destiny has presented a different path today. One we cannot ignore. Ilara, I stiffened as he addressed me directly. You will return to the ridge. You will attempt to commune with Skull further. You will learn what you can about this attack, about his nature. You will be our eyes and ears where no other wolf can go. It was an order from the Alpha to me, the bondless ghost. The irony was a bitter pill. Father, you can't be serious, Kieran protested. I am utterly serious, the Alpha said, his voice brooking no argument. Ilara, you remain Omega-stained, the edict stands, but you now have a duty to the pack that transcends that status. You will report to me and to the Elder Council directly. Do you understand? I understood. I was being sent back into the lion's den, not as a healer but as a spy. The fragile thread of understanding I had with Skull was about to be tested, maybe corrupted, by the demands of the pack that had cast me out. I looked at my brother's furious, humiliated face, at my mother's worried eyes, at my father's calculating expression. The whisper in my void pulsed, a steady, anchoring rhythm against the storm of their politics. I had no choice. But perhaps for the first time I had a purpose that wasn't about shame. I understand, I said, my voice quiet but clear in the silent hall. Good, Alpha Arcturus said, begin at dawn. Dismissed, I turned and walked out of the lodge, leaving the warmth, the tension, and the weight of their expectations behind. The cool evening air was a relief. I looked up toward the western ridge, now shrouded in twilight. The whisper in my void was a low, questioning hum. I'm sorry, I thought, toward the mountain, toward the Stormwolf. They don't see you. They only see what you can do for them, and now they're using me to see it too. The hum deepened, not in anger, but in what felt like a weary acknowledgement. He knew. Of course he knew. He had lived through centuries of such schemes. As I walked back to my isolated cottage, a new resolve hardened within me. I would do as the Alpha commanded. I would go to Skull, but I would not be their spy. I would be a translator. A bridge, and maybe, just maybe, I could protect the ancient, lonely creature from the pack that wanted to own him, and the pack from the wrath of the sovereign they foolishly provoked. The game had changed. The stakes were higher than my loneliness. And I, the wolf with no bond, was now the most important piece on the board. Dawn came, cold and sharp. I dressed in the sturdiest clothes. I had worn leather pants, a thick tunic, Lyra's wool blanket fastened around my shoulders like a cloak. I packed a small satchel, water, a little of the food Lyra brought, and the dark iron shard, now wrapped in layers of cloth and tucked into an inner pocket. Its presence was a constant, icy whisper against my side, a reminder of the hidden danger. My journey to the ridge felt different today. It wasn't a flight into the woods to escape pain. It was a deliberate pilgrimage laden with dual purpose. The pack's eyes felt on me as I passed the outermost sentry posts. Whispers followed. There goes the beast whisperer. The Alpha's new pet project. The titles were no kinder than Stain. I took my hidden path, my senses heightened, the forest seemed more alive today. I noticed the specific scent of damp pine bark, the intricate pattern of spiderwebs beaded with dew, the distant, rhythmic knocking of a woodpecker. It was as if removing the pack bond's constant, low-level noise had turned up the volume on everything else. Or perhaps it was the echo of Skull's presence in my mind, tuning me to a wilder frequency. I reached the high outcrop first, pausing to catch my breath. Below, the ceremonial platform was empty, marked only by scuffs and a faint, dark stain of Kieran's blood. A monument to failed ambition. I looked toward the cavern mouth, a dark maw in the sun-washed stone. The low, resonant thrum in my mind intensified. It was an acknowledgement. Taking a deep breath, I descended to the platform. Standing before the cavern entrance was like standing at the edge of the world. The darkness within was absolute, but the thrum was a warm, living pulse pulling me forward. Skull, I called, my voice echoing softly. It's Alara, I've returned. Silence. Then the soft scrape of a colossal claw on stone. The two golden eyes ignited from the deep black, moving toward me. He emerged into the light, his storm-gray fur seeming to shift and move like living cloud. He stopped a few paces away, towering over me, his head lowered to my level. His intelligent gaze swept over me, pausing at the satchel at my side. He sniffed the air, and a low, questioning rumble vibrated in his chest. He was smelling the dark iron. I brought it, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. My Alpha, my father, he commanded me to come, to learn from you, to ask about this. I patted the satchel. They are afraid, they call it dark iron, they say it is a weapon of enemies. Skull huffed, a sound of profound disdain. He turned his head, looking back into his cavern, then back at me. He took a step backward into the shadows, then paused, looking over his shoulder at me, an invitation. My heart leapt into my throat. No one in all the legends had ever been invited into Skull's den. It was the ultimate forbidden space. To enter was either supreme trust or a terrible trap. The thrum in my mind was calm, expectant. I chose to trust it. I followed him into the darkness. The cavern wasn't a crude hole. It was a vast, cathedral-like space, the ceiling lost in shadow. Light filtered in from high, narrow fissures, painting shafts of gold on the stone floor. And the floor, it took my breath away. It was covered in a thick, soft layer of moss, lichen, and delicate, bioluminescent fungi that glowed with a soft blue-green light like a carpet of fallen stars. The air was cool, clean, and smelled of stone, ozone, and living earth. This was no monster's lair. It was a sanctuary. Skull paced to the center of the cavern and lay down on the starry moss, curling his massive body with a sigh. He watched me, waiting. I slowly walked further in, my awe palpable. It's beautiful, I whispered, and the cavern seemed to swallow the sound, making it sacred. I sat down, not too close, folding my legs beneath me. I carefully unwrapped the dark iron shard, laying the cloth on the moss between us. The shard pulsed dully, an ugly blot against the natural beauty. Skull's gaze fixed on it, and a growl, soft but full of old anger, trickled from his throat. "Who did this to you?" I asked softly. He didn't speak. Could he speak? But an image, sharp and sudden, flashed into my mind. Not through words, but through the connection we shared, the whisper in the void. I saw figures, hooded and shadowy, moving with unnatural silence through a moonless night on the far side of the ridge. I felt a sharp, burning pain in my shoulder, his shoulder. The memory of the ambush, the surprise, the venomous cold of the metal piercing his flesh. The figures had fled immediately after, not staying to see if he fell. Cowards, assassins. The image faded, leaving me trembling. It was one thing to hear a story. It was another to feel the memory of the betrayal in your own bones. They didn't want to fight you, I breathed. They just wanted to poison you, to weaken you. Why? Another ripple through the connection. This time a cascade of sensations, the weight of territory, the flow of ley lines beneath the earth, a sense of ancient guardianship. Skull was not just a beast on this land, he was part of it, a keystone. His health, his presence, was tied to the health of the territory itself. Poison him and you poison the land. Weaken him, and you weaken the natural barriers that protected this stretch of wilderness, including the Silvermane lands. A cold realization dawned. This wasn't just an attack on a legend. It was the first move in a war. The hidden enemy wanted the ridge, and they needed the Guardian gone to take it. The pack needs to know this, I said, urgency coloring my voice. They think it's just a challenge, a symbol. They don't understand you're a Guardian. Skull's mental rumble held a note of deep skepticism. He showed me another flash, my father's calculating eyes, Kieran's arrogant challenge, the generations of alphas seeing him as a trophy to be mounted. He didn't trust them, and why should he? I know, I said, my shoulders slumping. They don't see, but I am here, I see. I met his golden eyes. Let me be the bridge, let me show them, not for their glory, for the safety of this place, for your home. He studied me for a long time, then he did something astonishing. He lowered his great head until his muzzle rested on the moss right beside the dark iron shard. He closed his eyes, and he began to hum, not a growl, a deep, resonant, melodic vibration that rose from his chest and filled the cavern. The star moss beneath him brightened in response. The very air shimmered, and then images clearer than before began to flow into me, not of pain or threat, but of knowledge, of the language of the land. I saw how the roots of the trees spoke to the stones, how the rivers carried memories to the sea. I felt the slow, patient heartbeat of the mountain. He was teaching me, showing me the world through his senses. It was overwhelming, beautiful, and terrifying. I was a single note being asked to understand a symphony, but I listened. I opened the void within me, the empty space where a pack bond should have been, and I let his ancient song fill it. Time lost meaning. I sat in the starlit cavern as the light from the fissures moved across the floor. I learned of the secret springs that held healing, of the stones that remembered old battles, of the wind that carried warnings. He showed me the faint, sickly tinge on the edge of his territory, the blight beginning where the dark iron's poison had seeped into the earth. Finally, the flow of images slowed. I was exhausted, my mind stretched in new, incredible ways, but my spirit felt more full than it ever had, even with the pack bond. I looked at the dark iron shard. Now, through Skull's teaching, I could see the poison in it, a writhing, malevolent energy. On impulse, I reached out not to touch it, but to place my palm above it. I focused on what I had just learned, on the song of the clean, living stone. I didn't know what I was doing, I just let the resonance of the mountain, filtered through my connection to Skull, flow down my arm. A soft, silver light, moonlight it seemed, though none was here, flickered around my fingertips. Where it touched the violet pulse of the dark iron, the sickly light dimmed, recoiled. I couldn't destroy it, it was too strong, too forged in hate, but for a moment I had pushed it back. I had soothed its malevolence. I pulled my hand back, stunned. The silver light faded. I looked at Skull, his golden eyes were wide open, watching me with an expression I could only describe as shock. Then that shock melted into something else, something like wonder and a fierce, proud recognition. He lifted his head and let out a soft woof of air, nudging my knee with his nose, a gentle, deliberate touch. In that moment, the whisper in the void wasn't an echo anymore, it was a duet. A bond forged not by blood or dominance, but by shared understanding and a promise to protect. I had come as a spy, I had been remade as a student, and I was beginning to understand that my emptiness, my rejection, had not been a flaw, it had been preparation. A vessel emptied of one kind of magic, now perfectly shaped to hold another. I returned to the pack lands as the sun dipped below the trees, casting long, skeletal shadows. I moved like a sleepwalker, my mind still resonating with the symphony of the mountain, my bones humming with the echo of Skull's song. The sensory overload of the forest, the chatter of life, the scent of pine and loam was both overwhelming and beautiful. I was no longer just looking at the world, I was listening to it, but the beauty was a fragile shell over a core of dread. I carried two burdens now, the physical dark iron shard in my satchel and the terrifying knowledge in my heart. How could I translate the language of stones and ancient guardians into something the Alpha and his council would understand? They spoke in terms of territory, strength, and threat. Could I make them hear the land's whispered plea? I went straight to the Alpha's lodge as commanded. The guards at the door eyed me with a new, wary respect but didn't bar my way. I was expected. The Elder Council was convened in the strategy room, a somber space dominated by a large table carved with a map of Silvermane territory. Alpha Arcturus, Luna Selene, Kieran, his arm in a sling, face still bruised, and the three senior elders were present. The air was thick with tension and the scent of wolf willow incense burned for clarity. Ilara, my father said by way of greeting, his gaze sharp. Report. All eyes were on me. I felt the void within me, now filled with Skal's resonance as a palpable thing. I took a steadying breath, my voice quiet but clear in the hushed room. Skal is not a beast to be dominated, I began, the words feeling inadequate. He is a guardian, a part of the land itself, the western ridge, the forests there, they are under his protection. His well-being is tied to theirs. Elder Torvin's brows drew together, poetic but unclear. What of the attack? I placed the cloth-wrapped shard on the table and unfolded it. The dark iron lay there, inert but sinister. This was an assassination attempt, not by a rival pack, I think. The memories he shared, the attackers were hooded, silent. They used stealth and poison, not strength. They didn't want to fight, they wanted him weakened and gone. Shared memories, Kieran interjected, skepticism etching his features. You speak to it now, not with words, I said, meeting his gaze. With impressions, images, feelings he showed me, he let me see. I turned back to the Alpha. The poison from this shard is spreading, it's creating a blight at the edges of his territory. I felt it. He showed me that too. If he falls, the land sickens, and our borders touch that land. A heavy silence fell. My mother was the first to break it. You felt a blight, how? This was the precipice. I looked at my hands. When I removed the shard, something changed. My connection to the pack bond is gone. But I seem to have a sensitivity to the older magic in the land. Skal is teaching me to understand it. I didn't mention the silver light from my fingertips. That felt too private, too fragile to expose here. Convenient, Kieran muttered, but he looked uneasy. A land sickness would explain the odd behavior of the game on the western hunt, Elder Nara mused, tapping a finger on the map. The deer have been listless, the rabbits scarce. We blamed the early frost. Alpha Arcturus leaned forward, studying the shard as if it were a venomous snake. And the purpose, if this hidden enemy removes the guardian, the ridge falls sick. What do they gain? A weakened border, I said, the conclusion I'd reached in the cavern spilling out. A sick land is a vulnerable land. If Skal's power falters, whatever natural barriers he maintains might also fail. It could be a prelude to an invasion. Or, I added, a colder thought crystallizing, they want the ridge itself, for something that requires a dead or dying place. The implications settled over the room like a shroud. This was no longer about a failed rite of passage. This was a strategic threat to the pack's very homeland. Your rapport with the creature, my father said slowly, his eyes locked on mine, can it be used? Can you learn more? Can you determine the source of this blight or the identity of these attackers? The word used grated, but I nodded. I believe so. He trusts me. As much as a being like him can trust any of us, I can go back. I can try to trace the sickness to see if I can learn more about the poison's origin. Then you will, Alpha Arcturus declared. This is now your primary duty. You are exempt from all other obligations of the Stained. You report only to this council. He looked at Kieran. You will focus on your recovery and on strengthening the border patrols. Double the guards on the western tree line, but no one is to approach the ridge. That is Ilara's domain. Kieran's jaw tightened, but he gave a sharp, dutiful nod. Understood. I was dismissed. As I turned to leave, my mother's voice, softer, called after me. Ilara, be careful. I paused at the door, glancing back. Her worry was plain, but so was her acceptance of my new role. I was useful now. A strange tool, but a tool nonetheless. I will, I said, and slipped out into the twilight. The walk back to my cottage was surreal. I was no longer just the rejected daughter. I was the beast whisperer, the land speaker, the Alpha's new scout. The labels whirled in my head. But beneath them, the truth remained. I was a girl with an echo of a mountain in her soul, trying to prevent a war. Back in the cottage, I lit the lamp. The silence was different. It wasn't empty, it was anticipatory. I took out a piece of parchment and a charcoal stick. Closing my eyes, I focused on the impressions Skal had given me, the map of his territory, the feel of the blight. I began to sketch, not with an artist's skill, but with a diviner's intuition. Lines formed showing the ridge, the healthy, vibrant flows of energy, and then the sickly, encroaching tendrils of violet-gray corruption emanating from a point not where I found Skal wounded, but further north along a remote stretch of the border. The blight had a source, an entry point. And it was spreading inward. A sharp knock at the door broke my concentration. It was too late for Lyra. Wary, I opened it a crack. Kieran stood there alone, his face pale in the moonlight, his good arm holding a small leather-wrapped bundle. "Brother," I said, startled. "May I come in?" His voice was flat, tired. I stepped back, letting him enter. He looked around the sparse, damp room, his expression unreadable. He placed the bundle on my table. Healing salve from Mother, the good kind from her private stores. He didn't meet my eyes. "Thank you," I said, unsure of this visit's purpose. He stood awkwardly, finally looking at me, his gaze searching my face. "The things you said in there, the land speaking, the guardianship, is it true, or is it some trick of the beast's magic?" There was no hostility in the question now, just a desperate need for truth. My proud, strong brother was adrift, his certainty shattered. "It's true," I said softly, with absolute conviction. "He isn't what we were taught, Kieran. He's so much more, and the danger is real. It's not about righting him, it's about protecting him so he can protect what's ours." He absorbed this, his shoulders slumping slightly. "I stood before him and saw only a prize. You stood before him and saw a king." He let out a short, bitter laugh. "The moon's irony is cruel. It's not about worth," I said, taking a step toward him. "It's about frequency. I was an empty vessel. He filled the silence with a different song. You were already full of the pack's song. There was no room for his." He considered this, then nodded slowly, a glimmer of his old intelligence returning. "This source of the blight you mentioned, if you find it, it could lead us to the enemy. I hope so." He looked at me, and for the first time since we were children, I saw no judgment in his eyes, only a grim resolve. "Then find it, Alara, and when you do, the Silvermane warriors will be ready." He turned to leave, then paused, "And thank you." For the platform, I was a fool, but I wasn't ready to die for my foolishness. He left before I could reply. I stood in the center of my cottage, the salve on the table, my brother's unspoken alliance a new, fragile weight in my chest. The divisions in my family and the pack were shifting. The external threat was forging strange new connections. I looked at my crude map at the marked source of the blight. Tomorrow I would go back to Skal, not just as a student or a spy. I would go as a partner, and together we would hunt the infection to its root. The next morning I approached the ridge with a new purpose humming in my veins. The satchel on my back held provisions, my water skin, and the map I'd drawn. The dark iron shard I left hidden in the cottage, its vile song was a distraction I didn't need. Today was about listening to the land itself. As I climbed my hidden path, I opened my senses as Skal had taught me. I let the visual noise of the forest fade, focusing on the deeper layers. I placed my palm on the trunk of an ancient pine, closing my eyes. Instead of rough bark, I felt a slow, steady pulse of life, a green-gold energy flowing upward from the roots. It was strong here, near the heart of Skal's domain, but as I moved north, following the direction my map indicated, the song began to change. The vibrant green-gold threads in my mind's eye grew dull, threaded with strands of that familiar, sickly violet gray. The feeling under my fingers shifted from vibrant life to a weary, thready pulse. Leaves here were spotted with unnatural black. The air smelled faintly metallic, like old blood and ozone. My heart clenched. Seeing it on a map was one thing. Feeling the land's illness was a physical ache in my own spirit. This was a wound, a deliberate poisoning. I reached the area I had marked. It was a place where the ridge's stone dipped down to meet the dense forest, forming a narrow, shadowy gully. A small, clear stream usually trickled through it. Now the water ran sluggish and murky. The moss on the rocks was dead and brittle. This was the entry point, the ground zero of the blight. Kneeling by the polluted stream, I placed both hands on the damp earth. I breathed deeply, trying to quiet my own horror to become a clear channel. I reached for that connection to Skull, for the resonance of the mountain. Show me, I pleaded silently into the bond we shared. The whisper in my void responded. It was a surge of focused attention, a beam of ancient awareness directed through me and into the ground. My senses plunged downward. I didn't see with my eyes, I felt. I felt the paths of the poison, thin, invasive tendrils seeping through the soil and bedrock, following ley lines and water tables, seeking the heart of the ridge. And I felt their origin, not a natural seep, a point of violent intrusion. Here, right where I knelt, something had been driven into the earth, a focus for the corruption. I opened my eyes, scraping at the mud and dead moss with my fingers. The soil was cold, unnaturally so. I dug deeper, my nails breaking against stone. Then my fingertips brushed something smooth and metallic. My blood ran cold. I cleared the mud away. It was a disc about the size of my palm, made of the same dark iron as the shard. Etched into its surface was a complex, spiraling sigil that seemed to writhe when I looked at it directly. It was pulsing faintly, a slow, sick heartbeat pumping poison into the land, an anchor. This was no lost weapon. This was a deliberately planted device. Sorcery. A wave of nausea and fury washed over me. This was so much worse than I'd imagined. The attack on Skull was just one part of a larger, more insidious plan. They were poisoning the land at its root. I knew I shouldn't touch it. The shard had been bad enough. This focused anchor would be worse, but I had to try. I had to see if I could counteract it, even a little. I centered myself, drawing on the memory of the Starmoss Cavern, on the clean song of living stone. I called to the resonance within me, to the silver light I barely understood. I held my hands over the dark iron disc, not touching it, pouring every ounce of will into pushing back the corruption. A faint, silvery nimbus flickered around my fingers. The violet pulse of the disc dimmed, and for a moment the metallic stench in the air lessened. A tiny patch of dead moss near the edge of my light seemed to gasp, a hint of green returning to its center, but the effort was immense.